our next reader will be Robert Leo Heilman, who is an award-winning author, essayist, and commentator for Myrtle Creek, Oregon. His critically acclaimed first book, Overstory, Zero Real Life in Timber Country, is a literary portrayal of rural blue-collar life in Douglas County, and is now available in a revised and expanded second edition, excuse me. Mr. Heilman has also published a retrospective collection taken from his 30 years of freelance magazine writing, The Whirlpool, a Literary Variety. Welcome, Robert Leo Heilman.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here tonight, and I don't mean that like, hey, you know, it's a pleasure to be
Take
here
some
tonight.
Microphone.
It's
But-
vital. Yes, you have to talk right into it.
Yeah. I'm
You
used to
can't be a
that.
foot away from it. You have to get closer.
That is going to work a lot better. Okay, we can do that too. Yeah, I'm Bob Heilman from Myrtle Creek. I have been doing a lot of writing professionally since 1985, and journalism, reviews, book reviews, that kind of stuff, news reporting, commentaries. But now being a retired old fart, I get to just do what I love to do, which is literary nonfiction, essay, memoir, some lyrical writing, and that sort of stuff. Gosh, I'm following two poets, so I guess I'm going to have to ask you to pardon my prosaic presence here tonight. But that's just the way it works for me. I write to keep from going crazy, basically. The essay is a wonderful form for that, by the way. It's a good way to exercise your demons and to straighten out things that puzzle you, that bother you. And they can act as a tool for understanding. So they're a wonderful thing. I'm going to open with what is actually the last stanza of a very old poem by a fellow named Luci. It's called the Wen Fu. Fu is a form of poetry, Chinese poetry, and it's a rhyme prose. Is the style. It's basically the equivalent of an essay for that time period and among those people. Literature is the embodiment of our thought. It travels over endless miles, sweeping all obstructions aside. It spans innumerable years, acting as a bridge. Looking down, it bequeaths patterns to the future. Gazing up, it contemplates the examples of the ancients. It preserves the way of Wen and Wu about to crumble. It propagates good behavior, never to perish. No realm is too far for it to reach. No thought is too subtle for it to comprehend. It is the equal of clouds and rain in yielding sweet moisture. It is like spirits and ghosts in effecting metamorphoses. It inscribes bronze and marble to make virtue known. It breathes through flutes and strings. It is always new. You'd think I'd know my way around this book by now. It came out originally back in 1995. It did real well with Sasquatch Books out of Seattle. And 2014 rolled around, I reissued it on my own, self-published like Walt Whitman did. And I revised it and expanded it. I actually got the name of a certain mountain range in New Mexico right, and the color of a corpse, which turned out to be red, not blue, actually, was kind of surprising to me when I found that out. People will point these things out to you when you publish. That they do need correcting. I'm going to start with a little piece called Turnover. It's from Overstory Zero, and it's one of the newer pieces that I added. I added 10 new pieces to it for the second edition, and it's now 100 pages longer as a result. I also cut one of the pieces from it and moved it over to the Whirlpool to help keep the covers apart, and it worked pretty well that way. So this one's called Turnover. It was sold originally to the University of Oregon's Oregon Quarterly magazine, the one they used to try and suck money out of alumni. So Guy Maynard and I had a really great relationship for 16 years. He would buy essays from me. Wonderful editor and a great man in his own right. So this one's called Turnover. I read a horrifying statistic the other day, which claimed that about half the people in Oregon had been living here less than 10 years. At first it seemed improbable, but then I thought of our friends who no longer live here. People we used to see often and visit, whose lives were part of ours. Within a few minutes of ticking them off on my fingers, I came up with 40 names and stopped, knowing that there were more. On just one street, the names ran Bill, Camille, Cindy, Craig, Crystal, Jerry with an I, Jerry with a Y, Kelly, Lynn, Midge, Nicole, Sam, Sarah, Sharon, Summer, Tim, Rachel, and Willie. I thought of potluck picnics and tables crowded with laughing friends who were not yet memories. Gone, some of them, living only 20 or 30 miles away, others to more distant cities in Oregon, others to Washington, California, and Texas, to parts and fates unknown. For me, this town, I realized, is a ghost town, though it is more fully inhabited now than ever before. Not so long ago in memory, at least, though I find the calendar has added 16 years since then, I found myself exploring my options at the Department of Human Resources Development on Pine Street in Roseburg. There weren't any options. My body was in the first months of what turned out to be years of chronic pain. The local economy was in the first year of what turned out to be 5 years of double-digit unemployment. Nevertheless, job counseling was required by the regulations that governed my unemployment checks. Sitting in a yellow plastic chair with others who were waiting for the trickle-down, I practiced Spanish by memorizing the government-issued posters, repeating Igualdad de oportunidades la ley prohíbe discriminación. I was expecting humiliation, the one thing I could count on, but secretly hoping that somehow I'd get lucky. Behind the door I would be walking through, there might be someone who could show me a secret path leading out of the mucky swamp my life had become. On the form, I'd listed all the kinds of work I'd done, jobs that required the strong back I no longer possessed, and which for the foreseeable future wouldn't exist even if I had my health. The bright yellow number 2 pencil had been sharpened to a lethal point, and a fantasy struck me, full blown. I could take a hostage. I saw myself with my arm wrapped around a caseworker's neck, pencil poised in his ear, ready to jab it through to his government-issued brain if my demand for a sack of unmarked small bills and a helicopter wasn't met. He turned out to be she. Sitting behind the desk was a gray-skinned, morbidly obese woman. I presented my papers, and in short-of-breath phrases, she asked a half-dozen questions, and I gave her my hopeless answers. When she fell silent and studied the form for a few moments, I gave up on my pencil project long enough to wonder what would happen if I poured salt on her. Would she dissolve into a greenish, foamy mess? Finally, she fixed her tiny eyes on me and delivered her professional opinion. Move to Portland, she mused. You should move to Portland. I protested that I couldn't do that. I explained I was married, had a child, was a homeowner, and had no desire to live in a city. I just needed some work that I could do. She shook her head. There's nothing for you here. Move to Portland. Think about it. I have thought about it many times over the years. Not about moving, but about her. Whenever I hear of another neighbor moving for lack of work, abandoning our valley for the urban wilderness, I see that woman and hear the sucking sound of her breath and the whispery advice she must have been handing out every 10 minutes, day after day, all through those hard times when 40% of the workers in this county left their homes in search of something they could do. This is a tough place to live, whether you've newly arrived or been here for decades. Some people manage to get by, and a few even prosper. But most of the folks who come here to settle in move on. They arrive fresh from the cities, all starry-eyed and infatuated, feeling like they've snuck through the back fence of Eden. It takes a while to realize that here too, life has a cost. Everyone eventually begins to suspect that their lives might be more comfortable if they lived somewhere else. Accepting the necessary struggle to live here is much like getting married, for better or for worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. Our valley's chief export is not lumber, minerals, nor cattle, but people, particularly the young. Nearly every family which has survived the hard times, despite staying here, has at least one child who, once they're on their own, left this small town for the city. I watched them go and hope that perhaps they'll return eventually, better for the experience. Once in a while, one of them does come back here to live, but not often enough. There's a pull to cities, a sort of gravitational well, like a black hole, the pull of money. It reaches into the farthest corners of the world, sucking the life out of rural communities through the horrors of environmental degradation, cultural impoverishment, and population loss. It seems as inevitable as the seasons, as though it were due to some unquestionable law of nature, like water flowing downhill and carrying everything that falls into it out to sea. Leafing through analytic reports, heavy with jargon and charts and projections, we find no trace of good nor evil, only digitalized fragments. It is as though our lives were not lived as human lives, whole in relation to unfathomable mystery, but as isolated segments which generate numbers. Only these numbers, pure, austere, measurable and comparable and unarguable, seem to matter. Only the numbers are particular, unique, and individual in relation to time and geography. In the glowing, futuristic world of government planning, social engineering, and economic development, everyone, everything, and every place is interchangeable. And yet, we continue to live our particular lives anyway. And we live them in our particular places. We live not by computer models, spreadsheets, diagrams, and graphs, but by the complicated, demanding, and necessary daily social juggling act imposed upon us by human nature and Mother Nature. Only through this daily exercise can we come to useful knowledge. To know our neighbors requires a good long while. To know ourselves is the work of a lifetime. To know our homelands is the work of generations. To pack up and leave is to abandon the faith, the hope, and the charity which ensure survival. Who will care for this place and the people who live here when nobody is left who understands this land, these people? It's not all dark. Like their parts in here. I haven't read that particular piece out loud ever, I don't think. So, where is it? Here it is, page 131. Years ago, a friend of mine had an advertising agency, and he hired me to do radio, television commercial voiceovers for him. And for a while, I got to be the voice of the bank of Umpqua Bank. This, of course, was ironic in that we were pretty much dirt poor, and I was leaping at the chance to make $100 to sit and talk into a microphone for an hour. They had me doing, they wanted a friendly old-timer voice, so they'd be saying things like, if you're sending your son or daughter off to college, send them off with the card that gets them ready cash. At over 50,000, SAR and exchange outlets worldwide. As if anybody in my family could ever afford to go to college. So. But as part of that, I ended up working on a project. I wanted to do some broadcast pieces, short, lyrical broadcast pieces. At the time, this was the late 80s, early 90s, there was a great deal of controversy going on about the Endangered Species Act, federal timber, all this sort of stuff, yellow ribbons. Friends of mine were getting death threats on a pretty regular basis of vandalism and things for speaking out on behalf of the forest. And it occurred to me that what if we could do a weekly series of these short little lyrical things that talked about what it is that we love about the place where we live, and left it at that. Maybe it would do some good. Well, it never came through. But I did get stuck with about 20 of these things out of the 26 I was set out to write. And they help keep the covers of a book apart, so they come in handy that way. This one's called The Smell of Home. Upriver from Tiller, Oregon, the South Umpqua River pours through a narrow channel between gray basalt rock faces into a deep, still pool where salmon circles slowly, waiting for fall rains. The spring Chinook arrived here in June after a 200-mile-long journey upriver from the ocean. The salmon know the smell of home, the scent of jasper, basalt, porphyry, quartz, agate, and tufa, carried by the waters from the gravel bars where they hatched. Patiently, they worked their way against the current, returning from the Aleutian Islands home to the South Umpqua. They wait out the long summer months when the river slows and the water grows warmer, never eating, living on the fat stored in their huge bodies. On summer mornings, you can see the sore-headed fish from the cliffs above, silvery ghost shapes in the sun-dappled waters below, moving in a slow, solemn circle dance. They are a bruised and battered lot, bearing the marks of their passage, old wounds from seal bites, fish hooks, nets, and the scraping of rocks encountered in the riffles of the home stretch. Their flesh, once firm from the Arctic feeding grounds, grows soft in the warm river water. Fuzzy white patches appear on their scaly sides, the mark of infection and a sign of approaching death. They are prisoners here for a while, holding in the deeper pools scattered among the shallow upper reaches of the river, rising in the cool, quiet morning hours, and hiding in the depths when the afternoon comes, bringing heat and the campers and bathers who splash about on the surface. Evening comes and the humans leave. Black-tailed deer come down to drink. The firs and cedars cast long shadows across the pool. The clever-handed raccoons fish for crawdads along the edges, and silence returns to their watery world with the night. There is a quiet joyfulness to their languid circling, not the exuberance of their leaping struggle through whitewater on their way up here, but a deeper joy made of patience, survival with expectation. Their long journey is nearly over, the uncounted thousands of miles behind them. Soon the rains will come, and they'll swim up the river on the rising waters, as their ancestors have always done, to dig their nests on gravel bars and lay their eggs in the waters of home.
Wow.
In my career, nearly everything I've done has been nonfiction, but I have, in fact, had a couple of short stories published, one of which I'm about to inflict upon you, if I can find it in here. There it is, on page 123. This is the new book. It's kind of a retrospective of, again, freelance writing I've done over the years. I've been published 300 and something odd times, I don't know anymore. Columns, whatnot. I used to do book reviews for Seattle Weekly and such. So, but this is a short story that I sold to the Sunday Oregonian. Do any of you remember Northwest magazine?
Yeah.
On the Sunday Oregonian used to have a supplement called Northwest, and it was a wonderful thing. Up towards the front of it, actually, there was an annual personal experience essay, 1,000-word thing that they would publish. 52 of those things a year. What a wonderful market that was for myself and a lot of the writers I've known over the years. And the editor was a wonderful guy. Glenn Davis was his name. I had sold him a few pieces, and I banged this out one day. I had been hanging around with a bunch of environmental activists down in Ashland, and got up one morning and wrote this story that I sent off to Glenn with a little note saying, "Hey, I think you might get a kick out of this." And he sent me a letter back saying, "I did indeed get a kick out of it. Here's $100." So this was good. It's called Dialoguing with Eric. We were working a cat show upriver. I was setting chokers behind a D6 and doing a little bucking between turns. It was still lacking an hour until noon when the boss gave me the load up sign. I climbed on the cat and shouted, "What's up?" "Come on in," Larry yelled back. "Damnedest thing I ever seen." We couldn't talk much about the diesel roar, and old Larry's a little on the deaf side anyway, so I just hung on while we clattered into the landing with our logs. I figured we'd had another breakdown. Larry's equipment wasn't exactly what you'd call new, but he could fix most anything if you gave him a pair of pliers, some wire, and a welding torch. The first thing I saw when we got to the landing was a little car all plastered with bumper stickers, parked next to the water truck like a calf grazing next to a cow, and a young dude sitting politely on the hood. "Who's that?" I shouted. Larry shrugged, "Don't know," and jerked his thumb over his shoulder, a sign for me to jump down and chase for him. Setting and chasing chokers behind the cat, you have to use sign language a lot. Logger signs, not the quick little finger movements of deaf folks, but great big obvious stuff, waving arms and clenched fists or a hand pointed straight up to the sky. Standing next to a bulldozer that's ready to lurch into action, A man doesn't want his directions to the cat skinner misunderstood. So we waltzed through the paces, slack line, jump in, pop the bells loose, jump out, roll them up, stop, until I hung the choker cables up on the back of the cat. I got back out of Larry's way, and he did a neat spin, backed up, lowered the blade, and pushed the logs to the top of the log deck. Larry skins cat with a grace that's a joy to see. Never a wasted motion or a moment's hesitation. I looked over to see if the guy on the car was suitably impressed. I figured he must be looking for work. A lot of folks out of work these days. But he didn't look like a logger or a tree planter. More like a college kid, actually. Larry backed down off the log truck, throttled down, and waved me over to the cat. I can't understand a word he's saying, said Larry, pointing to the fellow. Go see if you can figure out what he wants. Poor old Larry. Too many years of running a chainsaw without earplugs. Probably embarrassed to make the guy speak up. He was a young guy, about my age maybe, but everything about him seemed younger somehow. Shiny bright, like a new penny, and a little self-conscious. "Yeah, what's happening, man?" "Hi," he says, and holds out his hands. "I'm Eric from the Northwest Biocentrism Institute, a nonprofit educational organization promoting the conservation of natural resources and the development of community-based sustained resource economy." "I'm Bill Soffer from Riddle," I told him, and shook his hand. "I'm doing community outreach, and I'd like to speak to you and your employer about some of the socio-political and economic issues which are impacting this region." "Oh, you from Eugene?" "No, Portland." "Oh, well, okay, let me go talk to the boss." Well, no wonder Larry came and fetched me in. "He's a hellraiser," I told the boss when I got back to the dozer. "Wants to talk to you and me." Larry looked over at the stranger, checked his pocket watch, and looked at the log deck. "Hell's bells," he said. "I thought he was a salesman." Larry likes hellraisers. His grandpa was in the IWW, and Larry himself has a scar on the back of his head some company man gave him during the timber fallers strike 20 years ago. Well, let's eat dinner early and see what he's got to say. Maybe you can interpret for me. So that's how I ended up sitting on a log between Larry and this Eric character so they could talk to each other. Eric would say something, and then I'd put it into the boss's language, and then Larry'd say something, and I'd do the same thing the other way. I've never been to college, but I've read a stack of books like you wouldn't believe. So it wasn't hard, really. Eric reminded me of a tree planting foreman I had for a couple of months one winter. A guy with a master's degree in forestry who couldn't tell a porcupine pill from an elk dud. Anyway, interpreting was kind of fun, though it was hard to take time out for a bite of sandwich now and then. We, at the Institute, feel that the pervasive depletionary paradigm is too narrow of an approach to regional sustainability issues. The profit motive, which actuates the multinational corporate structures that dominate our resource base, causes a growing dichotomy between the well-being of our bioregion's inhabitants and the requirements of capital-intensive industry. He says he don't like the way things are run around here. The big outfits are too money hungry, and they're putting the squeeze to the little guys. Oh, ain't that the truth, Larry? Well, what are you going to do about it? Larry says he recognizes the validity of your assumption regarding the economic basis of the negative impacts of large corporate structures on rural communities, and wishes to know what type of social revitalization programs you visualize as being relevant to this situation. Are you from Eugene? No, Riddle. Well, where's that? Downriver. So we had a good time, the three of us, and Eric especially was real happy to be dialoguing with old Larry. Larry invited him to come watch us drop a tree, but Eric wasn't into it. Eric asked me if I was interested in doing some community outreach like him, but I wasn't into it. I like to do things more than I like to talk about doing things. But you really should be doing community organizing, Eric told me. With your ability to empathize with countercultural persons, you could provide your community with a valuable interface for raising consciousness on social change issues. Oh, that's okay. Larry's a good guy to work for. Well, we'd emptied our nose bags and had a nice chat, and Larry didn't see any logs coming in on their own, so it was time to get back to work. Eric shook our hands and drove off just as happy as could be, and me and Larry walked back to the cab. Well, what do you think, Larry? You gonna jump on the bandwagon with him? Yep, says Larry. Oh, he's okay. Still just a pup. We'll see whether he's worth anything a fight after he loses his milk teeth. Yeah, that was a fun one. One of the reasons I don't write much fiction is that it tends to be idea-driven rather than character-driven. Or, you know, I mean, I can write something amusing, but I can't write anything terribly deep in the way of fiction. Oh, I didn't realize it was that close to the start of the book. One last piece, if you have the patience for it. This one I wrote is part of another project. I was working on a piece about the migrations of my family from Alsace, France, to Ukraine in 1810, to Kazakhstan in 1904, to the United States in 1909, to Los Angeles in 1941, and to Oregon in 1975. We've been on the road a long time. But it turned out that this wasn't something that would fit. But it did work out well where it's at. And it's about this time of year, this wonderful holiday time of year here. So it's called The Milk Shed, and it opens with an Alsatian proverb, "A gute Kuh deckt all Armut," which means a good cow hides all poverty. I remember my grandmother one time, I asked her about, you know, the family back in Russia and what had happened and all. And she shook her head sadly and said the Bolsheviks came and they killed all the cows. And I didn't understand at the time. I just thought it was very cruel to do that to a poor cow. But now I understand that's a death sentence for the family. So, anyway, a good cow hides all poverty. It's dark out, wet and cold December. There are no stars, just a fine mist of rain. Oregon dew settling on the pasture, dripping from the barn roof. The first signs of the solstice sun will just be beginning to show. But not yet, not until after the milking. For now, there is only this shadowless gray world. Not quite darkness, not quite light. If you pause on your way between the house and the barn, milk buckets in hand, you can be lost for a moment, unsure of time, unsure of where you are walking, here in the silently drifting mist, between earth and sky, between waking and dreaming, the past and the future. Here between the house and the barn on this, the longest night of the year, there's an overwhelming sense of connection despite the solitude. Somehow, the night is made more real despite the bigness of a world without shadow or horizon. Perhaps because of it. The woman and the little boy are asleep behind you. The old cow and her small, perfect daughter lie in the dark ahead, their backs to the same wall. The cock roosts among the hens in the chicken house. The dog lies curled on the hay. The dark and the mist and the silence make them more real and more close and more precious than the light of day. They are revealed by the darkness, at once both the well-known and deeply loved particular beings you share this world with, and also every woman, every child, every cow and calf and cock and hen and dog past and present had yet to come. And what if they all somehow weren't? What if the old essential rituals have finally been neglected and the sun really has died this time, and the great cycles have ground to a halt, come apart at last with no connections between them anymore? Broken and shattered into its logical components, the fragments of reality would whirl chaotically, each piece alone and isolated and unfeeling, their truth retained as unrelated strings of random digits. Without compassion, the night would go on forever. But there are mouths to feed, and they depend on you. You don't need to look far for a prayer that will hold the world together. This simple chore is an essential ritual. There are rhythms in the night. Your own breathing, your thumping heart, and the pulsing of blood assure you and reassure you. This daily act is all the sacrifice it takes. This walk is the necessary, graceful dance which keeps it all going. World without end, amen. There's a stirring in the barn. You reach for a stick match, strike it and light the lantern. The dog has already risen from the straw, stretching, and then she smiles up at you. Overhead, the cats, resting from their hayloft mouse hunt, meow. The old cow exhales a sweet, grassy breath, rubs her horns on the wall, and her wide-eyed calf turns her head, regards you calmly. Each familiar movement is informed. You hang the buckets up on the 20-penny nail, leave them dangling from the post. Your rubber boots sound the ladder rungs as you climb to the loft, one hand carrying the ladder, one hand pulling you upward. You pass through a hole in the floor, one knee touching the boards, genuflecting as you step off the ladder into an open space between piled bales of last summer's grass. Crossing the floor, the cats, a sleek and stealthy mother and her fat, sluggard son, rub against your legs with cleaning. You look to the feed sacks, the stacked bales of alfalfa and grass hay anxiously. How long, you wonder, can this small world without money go on? The sun set yesterday on a breaking valley, shattering from the hammer blows of a collapsed economy. There is no work left but this. Across the valley, in the government housing tract, a dozen families, mothers, fathers, children, lie asleep. What if the sun doesn't rise? What if the cow goes hungry, runs dry, and they no longer have a jug of milk, at least, to calm their bellies now, when there is no way to earn their daily bread? It is important to do this right. Each vital step in the dance against death comes in its proper order. Done right, there is no strain or wasted movement. You drop hay flakes down the chute to the feed rack below, fill the grain tub, measuring the days from the sagging feed sack with a coffee can scoop. Place a flake of hard green alfalfa atop the tub. Walk with both hands full, balanced, down the ladder to the floor below. She stares at you, head tilted with one dull brown eye beneath a curving horn, and moves expectantly as you enter the milk shed, carrying a pool of lantern light. Her gold and white sides, brindled with black stripes over the gold, heave with her anxious breathing. Her pink tits stand out sideways from the bulging white bag. Mindful of her bulk, you set the grain before her. Mindful of her sharp horns, you duck aside as she thrusts her head through the gap, slide the hinged board in behind her ears, and lock it in place with a block of wood. Hearing the click of wood against wood, the dog squeezes under the gate, and after circling around in the still warm straw of the cow's bedding, lies down in the hollow to watch. You pull up a stool and swiftly perform an ablution. Knock the straw and mud and manure from her bag, wash the tits with warm bleach water and a rag. Cover your hands with bag balm ointment. Anoint the tits and place a bucket between your knees. You tap her rear leg and she moves it back for you, swatting you familiarly with a flick of her tail out of mild annoyance. You press the side of your face against your warm, solid side, your nostrils filled with the primal scents of cow and manure and fresh hay, and you are grateful for this moment. You grasp the fartits and begin the rhythmic squeezing, your forearms and hands sore and stiff at first. Left, right, left, right. Each squeeze produces a response as the good milk washes against the bucket, high-pitched and hollow at first, then deeper tones as it fills with the steaming white fluid. You get lost in the rhythm after a while. The left hand is peace. The right hand is love. Left, right, peace, love. It becomes part of your breathing then. Inhaling peace, exhaling love. Inhaling love, exhaling peace, as the cow's ribs too expand and contract. Time no longer exists in the immensity of a moment. You might as well be, and perhaps you are, any one of your ancestors, stretching back to Neolithic times, feeling the same ancient pulse and rhythms, smelling the same scents, waiting for the same sun. And then, off in the hen house, the cock crows.
Oh my God.